The White Pill is available now at whitepillbook.com. This episode is brought to you by Patriot Gold. Good afternoon, Michael Malice here. Let that be your welcome for the next hour. We have with us a special returning guest, someone who I absolutely consider to be a great American hero, Cody Wilson. Cody was the creator of the Ghost Gun, which allows you to actually have your Second Amendment rights codified by 3D printing weapons in your own home to keep yourself and your family safe. So there was some drama with you and Defense Distributed. Are you still involved with Defense Distributed in some capacity?
Oh yeah, wow. Since 2019, I've
Okay.
reassumed my role as Director of Defense Distributed.
Okay, terrific. So, and how can people find out more about Defense Distributed? Let's give them the URL up front.
Sure, yeah. We have lots of products. You can go to ghostgunner.net. You can go to defcat.com. There's lots of ways to read about us in the press. So lots of other websites too. I don't know what to say.
No, those are the kind of the big ones. So, someone yesterday on Twitter had this great tweet that the NRA is the best gun control organization that America has ever had.
Wow.
You guys have somewhat of a nebulous relationship with the NRA. Can you talk to people? Let me give a little bit of monologue. One of the reasons I'm so hopeful for the future of America is gun rights. So if you look at the corporate press, you would think that there's overwhelming support for gun control and all this other narratives. But if you read between the lines, you and I, Cody, I think are both old enough to remember that back in the day, and not that long ago, when there was an act of mass violence, immediately all the press would be like, we have to ban guns, we have to ban guns, we have to ban guns. And very quickly, Republican politicians would be hemming and hawing and be like, oh, let's sit down and figure out something. Now, and this has happened in 10, 15 years, they're like, yeah, screw you. We know this is done in bad faith. We're not going to take steps to take handguns and weapons out of the hands of sane, peaceful citizens. And in fact, several states have gone the other way, causing corporate apoplexy to liberalize gun laws. And in fact, there's a GIF I always post on Twitter where in the 80s, even in many states, even red states, getting a handgun would have been very close to impossible or difficult. And now it's constitutionally mandated in their state constitutions that shall issue, or even unrestricted, you have a right, as the Constitution promises, to have a gun in your own home. One of the reasons I moved from New York to Austin, and we still haven't really crossed. You haven't come to any of my events yet, Cody, but it'll happen at some point. But one of the reasons I'm in Austin is because I knew that if I had a gun in my home in Brooklyn and someone broke in, they're probably not having problems. I'm going to jail. Even if I use it legally and within the confines of the law to self-defense, it's going to be a bigger legal headache for me than it will be for this burglar and possibly attempted rapist and murderer. So can you talk to people about where the fight from your perspective is on gun rights in a legal sense before we get into your work?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great setup. And the NRA gets, they get dogged a lot right now. Some of that's deserved. And of course, the NRA has a strange relationship with gun regulation in the course of the 20th century. Lots of our institutions do. But the NRA was also a part of this move that you've identified toward kind of no compromise. It may still not be true. We note the use of, or the case against bump stocks in the Trump administration. But there was more or less, because of pressure from other up-and-coming successful domestic groups like the GOA, the FPC, and AGR.
Wait, hold on. Don't give the acronyms. Spell out those names so people know what they are.
That's fair. The NRA has felt the pressure from at least rivalrous competing firearms groups like the Firearm Policy Coalition, the Second Amendment Foundation should have been mentioned first, and upstart groups like the National Association for Gun Rights, and there are other groups. I should not leave out Gun Owners of America, which took on a lot of the membership that the NRA shed in recent years. Those groups have done a lot to push NRA and NRA-ILA. NRA really didn't have a good strategy, even in the most important Second Amendment case of our time, Heller. and was kind of late to the party and wanted to be. There's a lot of story there. There's a lot we can go into, but the NRA has also still been a part of this, and the overall uplift toward no compromise. The NRA has been instrumental in communicating, and so has a group like the National Shooting Sports Foundation, which was instrumental in suppressing and even like I don't know, dissuading people from having, like, for example, SHOT Show, the most popular industry show that there is. After the expiration of the assault weapons ban in 2004, the SHOT Show didn't want people to show ARs. The SHOT Show felt it was taboo, and yet that has been overcome. And I think a lot of that was because of internet culture, 2006 to 2008, and now it's a runaway. So the culture and the organizations have all been brought along, probably by dint of multiple causes that are very difficult to explain. But it's true what you identify. There's basically no attitude for compromise. Everyone knows that gun control is being offered in bad faith, and increasingly polls from all different types of people in all different regions of the country show an inherent suspicion against new gun control, or the effects of gun control.
Yeah, can you actually talk? I want to take a be kind of tongue in cheek, but not really, and thank Canada because Justin Trudeau very effectively demonstrated what the government would do if they had their druthers. Can you talk a bit about what recently happened in Canada with gun rights there?
Yeah, I can. I mean, in Canada, it's even more mysterious how they actually pulled off how they like created the power to ban and freeze handgun sales. But they did it. That's the most important part, right? And yet, I just watched a video on YouTube of Trudeau from 2010 saying, watch out. Any handgun registration is a pretext for disarmament, and that'll never happen here in Canada. And he's the guy, So that's wild to me. But that's politicians for you. So basically, they've assumed the power through the sheer force of the Canadian civic religion to just say, if you own a handgun in Canada, that's not happening anymore. You'll never have a new one. I just saw a story yesterday about how what they're seizing now in their little dragnets are 3D printed handguns. Well, that makes perfect sense, right? Where handguns can't travel, 3D printed guns will.
Yeah. So, and of course, wait, who are the ones doing these dragnets?
Well, Toronto police and yeah, obviously like these provincial metro police operations. I
But that's not
don't.
possible because if gun rights, are banned, then the police are going to stand up to the politicians and they're going to say people have a right to bear handguns, and we would never confiscate them. We're the
Right,
good guys.
right. Canada doesn't have the beautiful luxury of a militia mythology like we do. So it's actually shocking how easy this all went for them. So, in contradistinction to the point you just made about, oh, wow, in the last 10 years everything got buttoned up in America, it's the opposite in Canada. I remember meeting the head of the Canada's NRA in like 2013, and he was saying, "Hey, this is great. We're about to deregulate, assault weapons." And literally in 2 years there was a liberal government, and they fell off a cliff, man. There's nothing like a gun right in Canada now, and that happened very quickly.
Yeah, and it's the other thing that I want people to appreciate. And I brought up this point last week, is, and I think I'm credit to conservatives who, in my view, are just generally learning disabled, that they learned the lesson from the Patriot Act, because the argument was, well, this is just going to be for terrorists. This is just going to be for terrorists. We have to make these exceptions for terrorists. But then you point out to them, there is a huge percentage of the population, maybe 25%, who would, if a vote came, would say that if you're a member of the NRA, not even Gun Owners of America, NRA, you're a terrorist. And so very quickly, you will be defined as a terrorist, and whatever happens to terrorists will happen to you.
That's a popular Twitter meme. I'm sure you see it a lot, actually. Every time there's a shooting, it's now regular to see people say, well, the NRA should be reclassified as a domestic terrorist
Yes.
operation. I mean, we've seen that for 5 years, I think, and
Oh, yeah.
increasingly it's meant in earnest. And Uncle Joe, has given us like the new provisions by which I guess certain domestic agencies could actually act on that understanding, and they increasingly promulgate intelligence with this type of I don't know, categorization of American life. So it's happening. We're gonna farce our way into the reality, I think.
One of the things that's just craziest to me and just shows how much of this is being done in bad faith, because even if I did believe sincerely that passing gun laws would make cities safer, and cannot stand that you have handguns flying around and then people are going to be shooting each other in the subway, the claim that the NRA has these politicians bought and paid for, as if I'm from South Dakota or Missouri, that I'm some kind of gun grabber, as opposed to someone who grew up in a culture where guns are as normal as, learning to drive as soon as you hit 15, 16, or even earlier, sorry. Um, that just shows to what extent so much of this supposed dialogue in the public sphere is being done in brazen bad faith with absolutely no regard for any kind of factual basis.
Look, I'm in Austin, Texas, right? So are you. All right. So I go to a little cafe and I hear two old ladies who watch MSNBC repeat these things to each
Right.
other. But it's like increasingly, it's just you recognize these are useful idiots. I mean,
Right.
it's like in 2004. Apparently, there was a part of the adversarial intellectual tradition that honestly believed some kind of Bush-inspired theocracy was about to break out. You know, that's increasingly ridiculous when you look back at it. And at the time, I guess some people believed that. So it's both. It's like obviously anyone involved in what's going on knows that it's classic counter projection. Like Bloomberg owns the mind trust, the brain trust of gun control in this country, and yet that's represented as a popular movement. And of course, the NRA has no real purchase even on the hearts and minds of gun owners in America. But
Right.
this is almost impossible to communicate.
So let's talk about you. You emailed me. You texted me. Excuse me. You have some new stuff coming down the pike. Can you talk to people about what the state is of 3D printing? Actually, before you get into that, there was some legislation in California that I saw recently passed. Because here's your whole point. If you have the capacity, which thanks to you we now do, that if I have a 3D printer, I can create a handgun in my own home. And let's also point out that for centuries, even before America was a thing, people were producing not handguns, but weapons in their own homes. They were milling them and
Dude,
creating
Tom,
them
get the fuck
themselves.
out of here. What the fuck? I'm sorry, man. We're being interrupted.
It's okay, dude. This is a podcast, not a deposition.
I hope maybe you can edit that. Maybe you'll choose not to. I don't know what the fuck is going on today.
I'm gonna leave it in. Of course, this is podcast gold, Cody. Dude. It's okay. Why are you getting
Unbelievable.
so hard to find? You're so hard to find good help these days. I know what that's like. My producer is a complete incompetent mess. It
Just
drives me crazy every time I have to talk to him. Um, my point being, but if you have the capacity, anyone has the capacity, thanks to you guys, to 3D print a gun in their own home, then it becomes, well, how do I ban this? Am I going to just ban 3D printers? And there was legislation that passed in California that did something to that effect. Can you break that down for us, please?
man, you just recently saw this. You're saying?
Yes.
So there's two. Like I was much more aware of last year's version of this because
Okay.
I had to go to federal court in California to try to stop it. And in last year's bill, you just have to wait every year for California to update their their law in this regard. But last year they were saying, okay, well you can't sell CNC machines that can help you finish receivers in California. And I believe this year's law is, oh yeah, also you can't have 3D printers to help you make frames or receivers in California. I believe that's the updated thing. Now, last I checked on this, it hadn't quite passed, so perhaps you're more updated than I
I'm
am.
not
But
sure it's passed. I just saw like they were talking about it. I don't
yeah,
really
it
know.
was in like a codes committee or
Sure.
something,
Yes.
and like incredible testimony where they're like, you can go to this, ghostguns.com, and they sell this printer called the Ender, as if the name itself is some kind of joke or like threat that the gun owning public is, like lobbying at California. And so I saw like my website and others being blamed for naming Chinese 3D printers in this vaguely threatening way to California, regulatory interests. And so, unfortunately, I see a future here where California is going to say, "Fine, we can't ban 3D printers, but we can ban anybody who sells a 3D printer with even the mere suggestion that you could do something interesting with it." Is this the thing that you saw?
Yes.
That's unfortunate, right? And all I can say is that you see people, good spirited, good faith people on Twitter saying, "Well, that's ridiculous. That won't hold up in court." I'm back from last year to say, yeah, it will hold up in court, and that's what's scary about the country.
Yeah. This won't hold up in court. I'm sorry. The First Amendment explicitly guarantees the right to peaceably assemble, right? No one, even DeSantis or Thomas Massey, invoked that when it came to the COVID lockdowns. No one even pretended that that First Amendment right, that people can get together peacefully whenever and wherever they want, including on public property. And yet the lockdowns happen in complete
Yeah,
brazen disregard of that. No one
yeah,
even, because they knew it would be a complete waste of time. So this claim that California can't just ban a complete class of products is crazy legally. Now, maybe business wise, it would be a mistake for them, and they might get lobbied from organizations that use these 3D printers. But in terms of it not passing muster legally, these people are crazy. I mean, how many restrictions on gun rights have been upheld by the courts for decades. It's just, what are they talking about?
Dude, even in Bruin, even after Heller, like the California situation is barely manageable. Okay, I have no, I cannot see a way through it. I do not know what to tell you. And in the exact moment, actually, like in one respect, as regards unfinished receivers, 80% receivers, not quite 3D printable, but as regards those, we're up to the minute with the current federal law there. There's a case in Texas. Anyway, I can talk about it in a bit, but because of the outcome of that case, and let's say its nationwide ramifications, California is in this kind of superposition where it bans things that it assumes the federal government has banned. Well, the federal government won't have banned them, and so what does California's law mean? And it won't matter, right? I could literally be pulled in front of a judge in Sacramento and say, hey, actually, your law doesn't make any sense, and this stuff is all legal. And they'll be like, spirit of our law is it's still legal anyway. And guess what? In California, we don't have a Second Amendment, so just lose here for 10 years before you somehow remove it to the feds. And good luck at the ninth.
Yeah.
That's the position in California.
Yeah, and this is the case with many other, not just gun rights. It's the state has unlimited resources, unlimited time. You have limited resources. You, whoever the person they're targeting, has limited resources for limited time. I had this Joe McBride as the guest last week. He defended several of the January 6th guided tour victims, and he was just pointing out that they lock them up in solitary. They know they can't have jobs to make money, and it's just a waiting game. And they can play the long game far better than any individual citizen, or certainly in this case, any individual business, even Best Buy, who so happens to choose to sell 3D printers.
Look, there was a what was it, 1327? I don't remember anymore. It was actually struck down amazingly, but simultaneous to some of their latest gun laws last year, they passed this reg where they stack the deck against you even more, and they're like, if you come here into California and sue one of our gun laws, you have to win on every claim. You have to win on every claim from the beginning, and if you don't, we are entitled to reimbursement against you, like a judgment against you, even if you win on the merits. If you lose on any claim, we can get all of our attorney's fees back. So, like, they don't even want you. It's a violation of your power to even use the courts for redress. It's pure terrorism and punishment to even attempt to address the hostility toward the Second Amendment. That was real law, and it was only just recently struck down. And who the hell knows if it'll be upheld, in some court of appeal later.
Of course, one of the reasons I'm for national divorce is that it's become painfully obvious that California is kind of the laboratory for DC. That they try what they can get away with in California, they get away with a lot, and then what they can pull off in California, they're going to import then on a federal level, as night follows day. So I think people should be, and this is one of the reasons I'm, very much for national divorce. People should, anyone who thinks they could just hand wave away this stuff, they do understand that the enemy class, if they had their druthers, we would all be disarmed at a very minimum. And this isn't even ambiguous. This is just stated fairly clearly, fairly frequently.
Yeah, although now you can see, like, the tenor of our conversation is tending away toward your original optimism, and we begin to see that if they can't win in fact or something, like if there's some de jure recognition of, like, all right, you have the right to keep and bear arms, well, you're not going to know anybody who has them because it's literally going to be too expensive to maintain them or to have businesses that help you maintain them. I mean, this seems to be the new secondary line of defense or something, or line of offense in this case. And I don't mean to come bearing nothing but black pills. I'm just saying I had to sit here in this literal, mad science shop, as you observed, and weigh this idea. Should I go sue California, knowing that if I lose, literally like a million malicious judges will just allow California to collect millions of dollars of judgment against me because I tried to do the right thing? I mean, they're putting you in these impossible subjective places of, like, intense decision and kamikaze will. I mean, who's going to do that, right? Besides, like, actual extremist, insane people like me. It's upsetting. And of course it's like people with families, they can't make the choices to do this.
Oh, of course, yeah, and they're not dumb. I don't think they're. I mean, this is the other big conservative thing. Like, don't these people know what the Second Amendment says? It's like, do you think they care? Like, do you think this is garlic to a
Right,
vampire? Like
right. I mean, that's what Bruin is too, by the way. If your viewers probably know what Bruin is, should I explain it? I mean, it's
yes,
kind of
please do.
like a year old now or something, but Bruin is like the update on Heller, right? Because the courts ignored Heller. The courts were like, you know what, nice
Wait,
nice
break
decision.
down Heller for people because it's described accurately in media reports.
I'll do my best. Heller is
Okay.
basically the final ultimate decision that, what, we do hold and we do find that there's an individual right to keep and bear arms, and insofar as these arms are in common use and, not unusual or not especially dangerous, and there's a tradition of not regulating them, you can have them. And so there was a simple 3-step process in Heller to evaluate when the right is protected. And then there was McDonald, which held the same protections against state laws. Anyway, we ended up needing the court to rescue us again 10 years later because all the courts just turned Heller into a test of intermediate scrutiny. Like, okay, does the government have any reason at all, any justification at all for taking away your gun rights? Well, then that's probably a good one. And don't worry, it doesn't violate the Second Amendment. Well, no, not quite. That's not what shall not be infringed means, it turns out. And so Clarence Thomas has to come back with Bruin, and in Bruin they struck down New York's carry law, and it was like super strict, and of course it had been upheld basically with intermediate scrutiny. And uh, Clarence Thomas has to come back and say, look, it's in the literal text of the Second Amendment, and when whatever your regulation is, if it's conceivably covered by the literal text of the Second Amendment, like literally keeping and bearing arms, then you should just presume that your law is unconstitutional. Okay, like this is his instruction to the courts and to the legislatures. And I'm telling you, man, even that is not enough. This
No,
is the
they don't
problem.
care.
You know?
They don't care, and they will never care. Why should they care? Because it's a threat. Power is not going to cede itself, for no reason. There has to be some kind of counter measure, whether it's personal pride or just pressure or just the costs outweigh the benefits. Just a million things that will keep that in check. But the idea that like these judges are just going to look at what Clarence Thomas says, sexual harasser and potential rapist Clarence Thomas,
Oh,
and be
sure.
like, well, I guess I better do what the Supreme Court says. They don't care.
Yeah. Yeah, we've even seen like, gosh, I forget the judge's name in Mississippi. There's countless examples here. There's good examples of like people saying, all right, well, fine, Bruin means we strike this down, and so like laws are getting struck down. Do not get me wrong, but in important ways, we're seeing all this really petty objection to Thomas. And okay, in my case, for example, it's Judge Wu, okay, in L.A. And Judge Wu's like, you know what? I don't think Heller was rightly decided. And what does the militia have to do with this? And okay, well, that's settled law, dude. So why are you talking to us this way? And he just
Right.
says, you know what? Go over terminate the ninth if you care to. I mean, that's the state of play. The Article 3 judges just know they're empowered for life, and you know what? They disagree with Clarence Thomas, and yeah, sorry, you don't have a real country, and that's the state of play.
Folks, we all have busy lives these days, and we can't afford to waste another day stuck on the couch because of a few drinks the night before. Z-Biotics is the answer everyone's been looking for. Z-Biotics pre-alcohol probiotic is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. Here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. Z-Biotics produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. It's designed to work like your liver, but in your gut where you need it most. Just remember to drink Z-Biotics before drinking alcohol. Drink responsibly and get a good night's sleep to feel your best tomorrow. Every time you have a Z-Biotics before drinking, it'll make a big difference the next day. Even after drinks the night before, you'll be able to get to work, go on a date, or perform however you need to. Order Z-Biotics now to get in time for the 4th of July weekend. Go to zbiotics.com/malice to get 15% off your first order when you use the promo code malice at checkout. You can even sign up for a subscription using my code so you can stay prepared no matter what the time or occasion. Z-Biotics is backed with a 100% money back guarantee. If you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money. No questions asked. Go to zbiotics.com/malice. Use code malice at checkout for 15% off. And thank you to Z-Biotics for sponsoring this episode. Folks, in a startling description, the UN food chief warned the world with the words, knocking on famine's door. He called what we're facing a perfect storm of a perfect storm, and he's not alone. Barron's published that a food shortage could be coming, even the U.S. Farmers see it too. John Boyd Jr., he's a fourth-generation farmer, told Fox News that we're going to see empty food shelves in the coming months. That's why getting survival food is more important than ever now. Create your own stockpile, the best-selling 4 Patriot survival food kits. It's not ordinary food. We're talking good for 25 years, super survival food, hand-packed in a family-owned facility in the U.S. and giving jobs to over 200 Americans. They have different delicious breakfasts, lunches, dinners. You can make these meals in less than 20 minutes. You just add boiling water, simmer, and serve. Right now, for the next few days, listeners of Your Welcome will get 10% off their first order at 4patriots.com by using code MALICE. Go to 4patriots.com, that's the number 4patriots.com, and use code MALICE to start your stockpile today. Let's get back to the show. But let's talk about how you are in. There's the de jure and there's the de facto, and you have done more than anyone to de facto uh, um, actualize gun rights. So what is the you? I think you guys just recently. Why'd you make a face? You think I'm wrong?
You got to let me object a little bit to that. You can't just
Go
like
ahead,
bring me on,
please.
just have me accept it. I mean, look, I want that to be true, right? I try to make my job and my companies align with this object, and I've had 10 years of play at it. But gosh, man, along the way you meet a ton of guys who've dedicated their lives to gun rights, like Alan Gottlieb, for example, Second Amendment Foundation. So I don't want to just sit here and be like, yeah, it was all waiting on me. I just want to say that.
Well, no, I mean, if someone is 7'7", the other guy is 7'5", the 7'5" guy's not short,
Yeah, fair enough, man.
right?
Look,
So
I 3D
I
printing
mean,
guns
just
are a big deal. They're a big
yeah,
deal.
like listen, I'm an anarchist, as you know, so I'd much rather have the technology to make it impossible to put the genie back in the bottle than to have a Second Amendment that's written really strictly. Because as you just point out, like at a certain point they will just brazenly say, "I don't care," and even if you got them to concede what the Second Amendment says, they'll instantly be like, "Well, why should I be bound by what a bunch of slave owners believed 200 years ago?" So they don't care
No,
even then.
yes, there's literally a judge in Mississippi who did that. That must be why you use that example.
No,
Did you
I
see
just
that?
know how they think.
Let's see. That's not even. Do you see how that's not even satire? Like literally, that was a judge last year in Mississippi. He was like, you know what? Because Clarence Thomas's like his directive to federal judges is to say, all right, you must analyze these laws in the history and tradition of 1791 to the 14th Amendment. And this judge, this black judge in Mississippi, Obama appointee, says, you know what? How am I supposed to know what a white man in 1792 thinks about this? And it's literally what you just said, and that's on the record. Uh,
And you know how? It's not like they're using sign language. We have great, enormous amounts of records of their debates, what they believed, what they viewed. I mean, people are, they, again, this just speaks to this ingenuousness. They pretend to like look at the Second Amendment and be like, well, we have no idea what they meant by this, as if there weren't a lot of legislation in place at the time in the state level,
yeah.
as if there weren't debates publicly in newspapers and in political venues as well. It's just like, well, I don't know what they think, but I do know this. They're good guys, and I'm a good guy, so they think what I think, and I think this needs to be struck down. I mean,
Yeah.
that's literally logic.
It's funny because they are like probably this is one of the rarest moments in history where like your political class is also simultaneously your intellectual class, and like they write voluminously about what they were trying to do and what everything meant, and it's all there for you. This is
Yeah,
actually like pretty rare, and so to pretend there's some like deep mysterium about like the private right to keep and bear arms as inherited from the glorious revolution of 1688, and like instantiated through like I don't know, centuries of American colonial and frontier life. What could they have meant? I remember one of my favorite things ever, and I was so upset that I learned this like in my late 20s, right? Because I thought I was like I knew about the Second Amendment, and I'm literally just reading the papers of James Madison, and I see his own notes before he's giving like an explanation of the Second Amendment, to committee in Congress, and he himself writes like napkin notes. He's like, yeah, this is a private individual right based on
yeah,
1688, and it's like, well, goddamn, it's right there,
yeah, of course.
man who
And
wrote
it's
it.
what's even funnier is when you have this claim that like, oh, it says well regulated, so that means the government can regulate things, even though there's no ambiguity at the time. Regulation means to make regular, meaning I'm regulated, I go to the gym regularly, or I practice my firearm regularly, I'm trained in its use. But even assuming that their definition of regulated is true, if I'm regulating your company, I'm not putting it out of business. So to say like regulated means I could just ban entire
Sure,
classes of
sure.
weapons, also
Yeah,
disingenuous.
this is harder sociologically to approach because we have all the intervening politics of the 19th and 20th century, the managerial
Right.
state. What is regulation? What is the regulatory state? But look, I mean, the militia controversy, the standing army controversy, there are patterns of language used over and over again. There's this very common vocabulary that people are using when they say well-regulated militia. They're always saying, as opposed to a standing army.
Right.
Like we know the inherited tradition because it's very narrow and it's repeated often through the political culture of the British and American Whigs. We know what they mean when they're talking about militias. John Adams says, read Edmund Burke's, what is it, political disquisitions. He spends a fourth of that talking about like how great a private militia is. I mean, we can go on and on about this. We all know what it meant.
Yeah, and but they don't care, and I'm just one of the things I just love. I know people have very very mixed views on social media. I know they're going to use it to control us. To me, one of the best things about social media is that you're not going to hear what you and I are talking about really that much on the corporate press, maybe on Tucker or something like that. So the argument would be, given that we all agree that the government has the right to regulate guns, what should those regulations be, right? So when you have free speech in the sense of decentralized broadcasting, which is Twitter, social, Facebook, and Instagram, others outlets, and you have people like yourself being like, look, you don't have to go through Tucker, you don't have to go through Rachel Maddow, read what they said at the time. And then not only do you realize what they said at the time, but you also understand that what people today are characterizing what they said, they're not being having a different point of view. They're just brazenly lying. And when you point it out to them, they won't be like, "Oh crap, oops, I'm gonna go back." They'll just keep lying.
Well, sure. And you know what? I almost don't blame it. That's
Right.
the real anarcho tyranny, right? Like, they know that they're lying, actually. And you're the dupe for being conservative and being attached to this antiquarian idea that, like, well, if I just can influence public opinion, everything will change. Like, that's consistently the problem with, libertarianism or right libertarianism. This idea that it's still essentially democratic, as Curtis would say. Like,
Right.
it's still obsessed with this idea of communicating for the purpose of changing people's minds. No, you should probably just create the technical means to make all of this unnecessary and pointless.
Yeah, one of my favorite quotes that I'm delighted has gotten traction, uh, in to some minor extent in American political discourse is, "My rights are not up for a discussion, let alone a vote." And when you put it in those terms, it really just nips in the bud because, yeah, I know you saw that school shooting on TV, and I know you're scared for your kids, and I know in your head me having a gun in my house in Austin is somehow terrifies you and is a threat to your liberties. But yeah, I don't care, and go after yourself. The end.
Dude, there are these. I'm with you. I mean, Alex Jones shows the way in some sense. And so, if you would allow me to like lionize him, I mean, just this instinctual knowledge that the people have, the silent majority has, to epistemically deny the school shooting, like
Yeah.
just radical disavowal. Like, you know what? That didn't even happen. Okay.
Right, I know.
Whoa. What an antibody. You know?
Yeah.
This is why you have to sue this guy for, $1 trillion or whatever. Like, this is the way.
Yeah, I've hung out with Alex many times since I've been to Austin, and for people who are wondering, Alex Jones is even more Alex Jones in real life than he is like, he's not as, like, over the top and performative, which we all are when we do these shows to some extent, but he really and he's also pretty self-aware, so he knows about the memes, he'll joke about the memes, and he really does talk like this, so yeah. And he's a very nice guy. Like that's the thing about Alex. Like he's surprisingly like sweet and nice. And also a lot of people have turned their backs on him. You can't really blame him in many ways because of the fire he's under. So he's also someone who really does appreciate those who publicly say kind things about him, and it doesn't go unnoticed. So he's been a fun guest on the show, and I do enjoy having
Dude,
spent time with him.
I think you were at his premiere of the Alex Lee Moyer documentary. That's an incredible documentary. People will have to look back and know, regardless of their opinions now, that he's an American institution in the mainline tradition of American journalism. All right. Do you not think that the American Revolutionary Press was all about seditious, treasonous conspiracy and
Of
a
course.
crazy plot against American colonial life, to enslave them worse than the Irish and the Indians? Like this is America. And Alex Jones is the quintessential American.
Yeah, I think it's very safe. I think he's also like tangent. Like his family goes way way back. They're.
Yeah.
I think he's really like as American as it gets. So let's talk a bit more. So what are your recent technological advancements
Mm.
uh, vis-a-vis ghost guns and the ability to produce weapons in the safety of one's own home and privacy, more importantly?
This is why I wanted to come on the show. Thank you. So we sell a machine called Ghost Gunner. It machines metal, steel, aluminum, and it turns those things into guns. And for the last few years, Joe Biden has been trying to say 80% receivers. These
Wait,
things.
you're going too fast. Let's break this down.
Oh,
So
really?
what?
I am. Damn, yeah, I'm going too fast.
Because I'm a boomer. So I get your device,
Yeah.
right? I get from the internet, I'm assuming Amazon, I get a piece of steel, I get a piece of aluminum. I put it in the device just like I put a tape into a VCR, to use a metaphor that people my age understand. I press a button or I run a program.
This is a
Presto change, I get a gun.
that's the thing. Yeah. So 3D printed guns is like, it has more I don't know, contact with the American mind. So people kind of get what that may be. It's like something from nothing, basically. They kind of get it. But the other half of this, or the other side of this, the same family of technology, is CNC guns. And I spent the last 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, 60 years, 70 years, 80 years, 90 years, 100 years, 150 years, 200 years, 300 years, 400 years, 500 years, 600 years, 700 years, 800 years, 900 years, 1000 years, 2000 years, 3000 years, 4000 years, 5000 years, 6000 years, 7000 years, 8000 years, 9000 years, 100 years, 150 years, 160 years, 170 years, 180 years, 190 years, 200 years, 300 years, 400 years, 500 years, 600 years, 700 years, 800 years, 900 years, 1000 years, 2000 years, 3000 years, 4000 years, 5000 years, 6000 years, 7000 years, 8000 years, 90 10 years, more or less, after we printed Liberator, also developing a new DIY platform for doing another type of gun out of metal. And it turns out that this is much more popular, much more realistic with a segment of American society. Because if it's emotionally easier for you to, I don't know, begin 3D printing, it's actually kind of more difficult on the tail end to do it, to stick with it, to enjoy it, to make guns that really last very long. This is still the state of play. It may not always be this way, but in the case of CNC guns, which is what we sell a ghost gunner machine.
What does
That may
CNC
seem
stand for?
CNC is a computer numeric control.
Okay.
It's like if 3D printing is additive manufacture, like a glue gun, kind of stacking up layers. CNC is subtractive manufacture. You start with something like a chunk of metal, you cut away at it, you mill, you drill.
Like a sculptor making make a
Yes,
statue out of marble. Okay.
it's like sculpting, and it turns out actually in the DIY gun debates and this Cold War that we've had with government, state, and federal, the metal guns, the metal unfinished receivers have actually been like the hotter conflict.
Okay.
That's the real Ukraine, Russia, like that's the
Yeah.
real problem in the country. Like, and people have been buying these things like the Polymer 80 kit or like what are called 80% receivers for AR-15s. Like this is going on everywhere all the time. And the Biden administration thought that they finally had a way to stop it. And
Okay.
so I'm telling you all this to say, like, we've kind of been at the front of that fight with like what's called the 80% fight. And in the last few years, we've developed these techniques to stop
Wait, can you
Biden
tell us
rule.
what why it's called 80%, what that means?
Thank you. Well, in the case of 80% receivers, like they already look like the finished object. They're very nearly the finished object. So I don't have one on hand. I have like this steel thing next to me. Let's just assume this is a completed firearm.
Okay.
Okay, well, let's just also assume that like if I sold this to you, but this cavity was filled and like this was a
Mhm.
solid piece of metal and you milled out the cavity. When I sold it to you, maybe it wasn't a firearm. And when you milled out the cavity, maybe it was. And the 80% space is all about taking the definitions of firearms that the ATF has and saying, okay, well, we'll go right up to that point before you consider it a firearm, and then we'll sell it to people. So it's still a paperweight. Boy, it looks a lot like a firearm, but it's still technically a paperweight under the law. And that's the 80% space. This was popularized in California. California has now largely killed it. But anyway, it's very popular nationwide. And so Joe Biden tried to stop it. He tried to stop sellers from selling the receivers themselves and then selling the kits. And anyway, he's had a really bad time in the courts.
Wait, yeah, let me ask you. So selling a receiver means I am selling to you something that in no way can be used as a firearm. It's a part of a gun. A receiver by itself is not of danger to anyone.
This is the controversy. So if something is a finished receiver, then the GCA means to say that this is a regulated firearm, even if it's not, it can't expel a projectile. If it's
Right.
somehow finished, it's still considered legally the firearm, because American gun law has now like consolidated on this idea that there's always going to be one part of the gun which is like actually legally the gun,
Okay.
and everything else is just like grip, stocks, magazines, barrels, slide. You know what I'm saying? Like just the stuff you put on the gun, basically. That's kind of how the modular sense of guns has developed, and that's how American capitalism has took them, and unfinished parts makers have been able to like work with the ATF. It's just moved into this direction. I can't explain it. That's just where we are. Anyway, so if I want to sell you an unfinished receiver, that's really the key for you to making a ghost gun that actually works and like works for a long time, because it's actually identical to what you would buy, but you can make something that's just as good as the military grade. So this has been a chief object of American gun control, Giffords, Everytown, Bloomberg, all these people. Let's stop the ghost gun kits because they're identical to the thing that they already thought they had regulated. You
Okay.
know, 3D printing is supplementary in this space. Like, yeah, you can 3D print a Glock frame, and like that holds up for a little bit, maybe even a few hundred rounds. And that's dangerous. And like we just said earlier, that's what they're finding in Canada. So I mean, it's real. But that's kind of it. It meets this like initial threshold test of function. The 80% receivers and the Polymer 80 kits and these things, they actually make something that's identical to what you would like, I don't know, hope falls off the military truck. Do you see what I'm
Right.
saying?
Yes.
So this is a problem in the so-called ghost gun debate. Anyway, what we've invented, I almost see that this is like impossible to explain, but because they banned Polymer 80 kit and so-called ghost guns that look like Glocks, we thought, okay, we fought this lawsuit in Texas and we got this injunction, and we were like, you know what? Now the ATF is in this temporary place where they can't define what a firearm, frame, or receiver even is. This is like a rare moment of like a political vacuum, and I know I'm speaking to a mainstream audience, but just like take my word for it when I say we've invented another way to do a Glock. So Formerly, if you would print this, this would be considered a firearm. Now I'm telling you,
Wait, hold
uh,
on. So legally, that what you're holding would be considered a firearm, even though there's no way you can shoot anything with it.
yeah, I should have illustrated this the whole time. So
Okay.
this exact piece, no, but like what you print that normally looks like this, yes, this is considered a firearm.
Okay.
What we've done is we've removed the firearm again in abstract. So now we're saying this is a firearm in a Glock. This is just a grip module. Now this is an accessory like anything else. And so we kind of carry the fight like one level deeper in abstraction. And we say like, okay, now we're fighting about this. And how do you make this? I just give you a block of steel. You make it on the machine. And again, we're back to, okay, I can print a grip module. I've made the firearm from a block of metal. It's just another way of doing Glock type concealable ghost guns. This is like a third chapter in the Glock type ghost gun. That's what I came here to talk about.
So this is very exciting. So how much does a block of steel cost? Let's break down the prices for this.
Well, we sell 303 and I think 4140. So, less than $60, I think, for
Oh,
the 4140.
okay.
It's just a block of metal, man. And I'm just buying it from a bar, at a metal shop. So if you don't want to buy a block of metal from me in the mail, get your own block of metal. That's what's so great about this. And it's a stock part. It's a stock size. And so again, the ATF can't make a credible accusation that, okay, well, this type of 17.4 bar, actually this is a gun. Like that's the purpose of the mission of Ghost Gunner. It's like everything can be reduced to its primordial state, and the ATF has no place here. There is no refuge. There's no way for the law to invade. You can reduce these things to like these ineradicable, irreducible levels of problem.
And like an easy parallel people wrap their heads around is like, let's suppose I wanted to ban pencils, right? I got a pencil right here, US&A. Well, like you have to ban graphite. You're gonna have to ban wood. You're gonna have to ban this metal part at the top. But if I can make that graphite in my own house, and I can make the wood shell in my own house, and the metal part at the top in my own house, which I'm sure I can, like how are you really going to define a pencil? And whatever you define as a pencil, I can just make in my own house very easily and in untraceable ways. Unless they are going to, and we can't put this past them, make it that anyone who sells a block of steel has to kind of fill out a form like you're trying to buy Percocet or something. They're really up shit's creek because technology is always going to move faster than bureaucracy.
Right. That's what we're asking them to do. We're saying, okay, California, federal government, if there's really a sensible regime of gun control, you should probably add blocks of metal to the 4473. And that this is, a task that they cannot take on. So it's a challenge. We're overbidding them to make gun control real in the terms that they constantly market, on TV, because they assume, they pretend that all of this stuff is encapsulated and it is observed. And of course, it is not.
Hey folks, billionaire investor Ray DeLeo said increasing the debt limit means there's no meaningful limit on the debt and will eventually lead to a disastrous financial collapse. Bloomberg warning of a severe economic reset. Gold appears as a caged bull awaiting a catalyst. JP Morgan warned cut stocks, buy gold, and hold your cash. And the Financial Times said investors are gaga for gold. Wells Fargo said gold is in a super cycle that could last another 6 years. Worst case scenario, $3,000 gold. So searches for how to buy gold on Google hit record levels in April. It's as simple as calling the Patriot Gold Group today to get yours. Find out why they are A+ rated, Consumer Affairs top rated gold and silver company nationwide. Call the proud Americans of Patriot Gold Group today before it's too late and mention my name. That's Michael Malice, and you'll always get best-in-class service from Patriots protecting Patriots. Patriot Gold Group has the no fee for life IRA, where your IRA or 401k can be in physical gold and silver, and you may be eligible for the no fee for life IRA on qualifying rollovers. All you have to do is call 888-505-9845 to get a free investor guide, or simply just go to malicegold.com. Patriot Gold Group is Consumer Affairs top-rated gold IRA dealer 6 years in a row. So call 888-505-9845 or go to malicegold.com to protect your money. Let's get back to the show. So let's play devil's advocate here. I'm sure you hear this a lot. Thanks to you, you've made school shootings more possible and mass shootings more possible, and you are a danger to the public safety. What do you respond to people who say things like that?
I don't know, whataboutism. Because I'm angry today, I guess I'll say, what about, SSRIs and big
Yeah.
pharma? Haven't they made school shootings more likely? It's easy for me to just knee jerk say, okay, well, there's no statistical evidence of that, and the ghost gun shootings that we have seen connected to or near school shootings have been from ancient technology. Like I think the last ghost gun school shooting was like a 1911 that was finished by hand from a steel frame. I mean, goddamn, that frame is 100 years old. That technology is ancient history. I mean, if anything, it's like shit, maybe I made school shootings 100 years from now more likely. I mean, you've got a huge problem with like hundreds of millions of guns and their components just in free supply.
One of the other reasons I'm very hopeful is because of gun proliferation. Like you and I could have different views about gun control, but at a certain point, if there's so many guns floating around, it becomes much, much harder and impracticable to kind of seize them all up, although they would certainly attempt to. Uh, is that not the case that in the last, I think, what, 10, 15 years, the amount of guns that are in private ownership in America has just gone through the roof in terms of sales?
I think by some estimates, sure, like FBI shows there's record background checks for the last like three social crises we had, COVID, Floyd, election of Biden. I mean, yeah, these are like record setting years, but also like there is increasing consolidation of like gun ownership within certain households, among
Sure.
certain people. So there's like gun super users who like are obtaining like their own armories. So there is some truth to like there's some truth to both. Like we have wider demographic penetration, both with
Yep.
women and owners, minority gun owners. This is all true, and increasingly, and this is kind of I don't is it delicious? I don't know, but increasingly like doctrinaire or like orthodox gun control is actually mostly observed by the white liberal elite. Like you see this reflected in public surveys. Like even if you don't want to be pro gun, if you actually live in like the ghettoized, ruined parts of America, you more or less have to be, or you're at least open to the practical realities of this. So it's increasingly a luxury belief held by completely ensconced, liberals.
Yeah, one of the stupidest things, and it's just, and this is another reason why I'm so hopeful is because they don't know what they're up against. Is you'll see people like Joy Behar on The View, which is the Karen mothership, just brazenly say, just wait until like minorities have guns. You'll see these Republicans flip on their head, and maybe some of the Republicans would. But if I had my druthers, and I'm positive you agree, and pretty much every gun rights person I know agrees. If I had my druthers, that black lady who lives in the projects, the old black lady, she'd be the first person I would make sure has access to handgun because she's the one I'm most worried about. She's going to be in an area with high crime, high poverty, no access to police protection, and she's going to be the most vulnerable one. So this argument that it's a race thing is so, but I think they really believe it because in their heads, anything against them is racist.
Yeah, I think they do. It's this reverse liberal universalist idea that
Right.
only they have. I don't. Plenty of people fight this fight, but actually, like even through the mainline tradition of Heller that we mentioned earlier, Black Americans played a big role. Dorothy Parker was big as an initial plaintiff in Heller One, I think, and then of course D.C. and Chicago were like the sites of this fight. And Mr. McDonald himself was the son of sharecroppers from Louisiana, and he is recorded as saying he saw his victory as a victory of African American civil rights. And Nicholas Johnson records this in some of his books. I mean, there's a strong culture of African American gun ownership, even in opposition to mainline gun ownership. So this thing has its own place. And increasingly, what I see is like people like Carol Anderson, kind of professional academic race baiters, saying actually there's no role for blacks in American gun culture, and increasingly what we see in American gun culture is white supremacy. And this is actually the biggest lie, and this is what's maintained, like you're saying, by the Joy Behars of the world. They have to convince you that you weren't instrumental post Civil War in the creation of the actual universal right to keep and bear arms.
Right. It's but this is the other thing is this Karen meme, which is other than the NPC meme, maybe one of the greatest things that happened in political discourse in the last 10 years, has effectively nullified the gnashing of teeth and the wailing and the clutching of pearls from a certain very specific, the awfuls, the affluent white female liberals, and their, apoplexy. And I think for an increasing percentage of the population, people realize A, they're not acting in good faith, and B, your hysterical toots take a Midol. There's really no point in engaging with you because you are driven by values and emotions that are just antithetical to how grown-ups make decisions, and you should be, as much as possible, marginalized and humiliated.
If I can make this less about the Karen type and more about strategies of, let's say, feminine power, or
Sure.
House method. Like, I'd like to make it more sociological, maybe, because even I feel bad for some of these Karens sometimes, like that poor bike lady. I don't know where the
Well,
truth
no,
is.
she's not a Karen though, that bike lady. I'm
Yeah,
talking about the not people who are called Karen. I mean, just the actual archetype of
sure.
someone who feels because they're upset, literally all of society has to be reoriented to assuage her, disquiet. This is a
Right,
insane,
right.
extremely narcissist view that has been validated and until recently, almost universally.
Yeah, there's this. I from all points now, we're getting, like, I think, accurate takes on so-called feminine strategies. And
Yes.
in my study, like, Baudrillard called society, basically society's role is hospitalization at this point. Like,
Right.
go anywhere. And then there's, like, battalions of TikTok moms being like, "What the hell? Some random kid from the neighborhood came up to play with my kid. What the hell is going on?" You
Yeah.
need experts to give you opinions on literally every daily social interaction, so that, like, everything is scripted and not outside the bounds of. It's very Westworld. It's very everyone in their loops. And this is the disquiet and the discomfort in society. This is the thing that young men rage against, and do not have a name for. And so, please, print a firearm, upset your mom.
Yeah, it's also, you say scripted, but it's also because, yeah, they're all like doped to the gills, as you said
Mm,
earlier. In SSRIs, you could
nice,
see it
nice.
whenever you talk to them. Like there's something else going on, and we can be glib about it, but when you're en masse medicating a nation and affecting brain chemistry, and that also applies to hormones, by the way. If you're having males or females taking estrogen or testosterone and thinking this isn't going to affect their brain chemistry and how they make decisions, you're just completely in defiance of just basic biology. And that is something that, because it doesn't have an easy narrative of good guys versus bad guys, it is not something that is discussed with any kind of nuance in corporate media sources.
This is the fight, man. I mean, I just saw that testosterone has fallen 30% in the last 15 years.
Is that right?
Check it out, bro. I mean, high intensity health. Lots of people are reporting, like, these consistent. I mean, like, rapid, accelerated losses in testosterone. Where even in the year 2000, they were saying, well, yeah, maybe it's down 25% since the 70s. I'm telling you, in the last 15 years, okay. And it's not such a mystery. It's not just the plastics. I mean, RFK Jr. was just on Joe Rogan, as you may have seen. Oh yeah, atrazine's in 80% of the water supply. uh, it's literally feminizing everyone. I mean, like, literal feminization is chemically and hormonally, as you pointed out, an actual thing that is happening. And look, I don't know what to do about it, but I mean, it's happening.
That is, and the fact that this isn't discussed, that we spend more time as a culture discussing hormones for so-called trans kids than something like this, which is universal and affects pretty much everything. It'll affect military readiness, it'll affect birth rate, it'll affect mating strategies, it'll affect achievement in business, where testosterone is strongly linked with achievement and aggression, positively and or negatively. Removing it is going to have a consequence. So that is, I was not aware of that statistic, and that is not a blip.
Yeah, I hate to be the guy, man. Increasingly, I think of, like, all right, the writings of, like, the conservative revolutionaries, and, like, okay, we have this American tradition, which is, in one way, in one argument, like a completion of, like, one of the final acts of the European Renaissance. All right, a dedication to Homo liber. Like, oh, what is the free man? Well, I think increasingly the relevant term in that dyad is, like, man. Like, how do we stay men is probably the harder fight than how do we stay free. I don't know what to do about it, but radical technical intervention is probably to be addressed in this question as well.
So let's talk a bit now. So how can people so this new program that you rolled out, how do people get that if they want to get a hold of it?
That's ghostgunner.net. We're also making, like, a 100% version of this chassis, by the way. I think a lot of people just want to have a 100% version. They don't want to make it themselves. So we're working with, like, Flux and other people. I don't think they'd mind me talking about that. So ghostgunner.net, if you want to check it out. It's new, it's out, it's all free for download. Yeah.
So I go to ghostgunner.net. What can I can get? And then I can mail in my own home. What, a Glock?
Yeah, yeah. You can mail 80% receivers. Those are still legal. You can mail 0% receivers. What we're showing today is this is what we call the 0% pistol. So it's in combination. Where I'm kind of enticing people to use both 3D printing and milling. Now I
Okay.
feel like kind of marrying these techniques. Now you
So
don't
the,
have to.
the the bottom part is plastic, a hard plastic, correct?
Yeah, this is printed, actually. This is printed from
Okay.
home. So this is kind of a technical demo. It's also a philosophical demo. It's like, hey, actually, both sides of the family can come together on things like this. You can use techniques to make metal and techniques to make plastic. You can do them both in your home. You can do them together. Just another way of, you know, solving the problem.
What is the so legally, I know some states have tried to make it that if I create a firearm in my own home, I then have to register it or I'm subject to some felonies. Can you break that down? Is that the case in some states?
It is. It is the case. In fact, in California, for example, you have to ask them for a serial number before you make the firearm. So please check your state laws. But I think a number of states are taking the easier way, which is just to say it's a crime for you to have a firearm that doesn't have a serial number.
Okay.
And you should expect, if you live in one of these blue states, that that's probably the law before you do this stuff. But no, it is true that some of these states will still permit you to make a gun. You just have to tell them about it. Well, that doesn't sound fun, does it?
No. Wait, can you tell, do you know off the top of your head what those states are?
I know California's the one I repeated there is right. I believe there's like something similar in Washington. I don't know that he wants me to mention it, but there's a guy named Matt, and he was in Rhode Island, and that's what they did. He's a test case in Rhode Island right now. They passed a ghost gun law, and so he had a few printed frames, and for every printed frame he had, they just gave him they just lobbed it up and gave him like 10-year charges for each one. I mean, he's looking at like 100 years or something. This is happening right now to like young men in this country, and it's kind of a shame actually that the 3D printed community doesn't spend more time on like helping their own rather than like tearing at each other all the time.
And just to be explicit, if I had a 3D printed frame, that frame is incapable of harming anyone in and of itself, correct?
Well, exactly. I mean, it obviously depends on the gun, but right, you're saying in general, if I make a frame for a firearm, it's not ready to expel a projectile,
Right.
right? Yeah,
Yeah. So
exactly.
it's again, he's getting 10 years for something that in and of itself cannot kill, let alone cannot harm, let alone kill someone.
Well, dude, there's a lot to say there, and you know what? I don't know that he wants me picking over his case, so I kind of feel bad about it. But yeah, it's like this guy was literally just trying to be in business, which is like making guns and gun parts in America is like an American trade. I mean, there's literal quotes from Thomas Jefferson saying like, "This is our livelihood, and this is like a
Yep.
thoroughly American thing." For them to, you know, morally reverse this and to get away with it and to make people feel truly bad and to ruin people's lives for it, that's the kind of cultural comp that like I don't know a better way to fight it, but I'm viciously opposed to it.
Amen.
Have you ever heard that story that Napoleon used the Egyptian Sphinx for target practice and shot its nose off? Or maybe you've heard that a French astrologer named Nostradamus correctly predicted nearly 500 years of human history. Or maybe someone told you that the legendary blues guitarist Robert Johnson sold his soul to the devil at a crossroads in Mississippi. These stories are what I like to call historical myths. Great little tales that may or may not have any basis in historical fact. On Our Fake History, we explore these historical myths and try to determine what's fact, what's fiction, and what is such a good story it simply must be told. If you dig stories about death-obsessed emperors, lost civilizations, desperate sieges, voodoo black magic, and famous historical figures you thought you knew, then Our Fake History might just be your new favorite podcast. If you dig it, then subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts.
One of the last things I want to ask you about is I hear a lot of pushback among readers of mine about President Trump and his bump stock ban. I know his quote about "you take the guns now and worry about due process later," which I just think sounds more Trumpy rather than an actual commitment of ideology or policy. It's more like you just do what you want, just we'll worry about it later. Like that seems to be his MO as opposed to some kind of deeply thought out philosophical position. In your professional experience, how has the Trump administration been regarding gun rights? Friend, foe, mix?
It's tough. There is something Machiavellian and even true about what Trump says. Like, well, let's just solve
Yeah.
the problem, right? Like, I think we all identify with that. But it is true that in the bump stock case, he kind of opened the door to allow ATF to play some games that they shouldn't have been allowed to play. it was ultimately reversed. Of course, it took what 6 years or something. Mike Cargill, I'm lucky to know him. He's the plaintiff that really delivered the death blow to the bump stock thing here in the Fifth Circuit. He kind of did that on his own, man. Financed it himself, and it's up to these like irate, tireless, literal minorities to take care of these things. So Trump left us a problem, but it is funny, in my own case, Trump stood in the way of settling the 3D printed gun fight with the State Department on round one. We know he stood in the way, and I just recently heard him at the NRA though give a speech saying like, I was the guy, I promoted 3D printed guns. So you know what? I'll take it. He's come around, and maybe it's okay if he's willing to retcon his commitments to the 2A.
Wait,
That's
so
good.
Trump explicitly endorsed 3D printed guns publicly?
Hey man, I'll send you the speech. Where he's like, whoever wrote this form was like, I was the first guy to support 3D printed guns.
Wow.
I'll find it for you, man. I heard it. I
Your
made
jaw
sure.
must have dropped.
What's that?
Your jaw must have dropped.
I was like, well, that's funny. Because I remember the tweet. Where he was like, NRA's telling me this 3D printed gun thing's no good. And, this was about my lawsuit. He's like, I'm going to have to look at this. He blew up my life for the next few years. But I'm glad he's come around. I'm happy he was the first guy to support it. But look, we should expect a similar performance if he gets back into office.
Can you talk about, have any other candidates running for office in the Republican primary, have they weighed in on this issue one way or another?
On 3D guns?
Yeah.
Man, not that I know of, dude. I would be, DeSantis is probably smart enough to not have an opinion.
Right.
But like I had said earlier, every major American gun group now has got a smart approach to 3D guns. Even if it's not outright endorsement, they're like, look, it's an American tradition to make firearms. And so they kind of make this traditionalist argument about ghost gun laws. Actually, this is meant to just target good, hardworking hobbyists and, like cast what's a thoroughly commercial and legal activity into suspicion. So they've got really good lines on it. But no politicians that I'm aware of outside of Thomas Massey are like explicitly pro 3D printed gun.
Well, no, but it's the fact that they haven't explicitly come out and come out against it is also interesting and telling, because there's a big incentive for them, because then they'd be valorized by their media buddies about like, look, sure, because then they could say, well, even Tim Scott agrees, blah 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 blah.
You're right.
So the fact that they're not sticking their necks out to attack you and what the movement is doing, that's not a bad thing.
You know what? You're right. At the same time, there is a lot of innovation at the state level. So I just feel like gun control, by and large, has decided on this state-by-state approach, knowing that there's just this lock at the federal level. But what else can I say about this? The tenor is still different. Like I remember when they first renewed the Undetectable Firearms Act. This was 2013, right after we did Liberator. There was intense interest in doing that and trying to figure out a way to stop 3D guns, and they didn't really get away with it. And now the Undetectable Firearms Act expires this year, I think, and you hear nothing said about it. So to some credible degree, like there's a loss of interest, or there's a recognition that not much can be done.
But the other thing is they don't ever have to recognize reality, right? That's part of being a politician. So the fact that they're not out there saying, I'm the one who's going to put a stop to this. It's that kind of meme about the boomer wearing the MAGA hat and saying, yeah, I'm for freedom as long as it's legal. This kind of...
There was a politician, Steve Israel. I think he used to head the DCCC, and every time I do something, like the first time I printed a receiver, he's like, I've introduced legislation to ban the printing of receivers. And then I was like, okay, I printed the first magazine. He's like, I've introduced legislation to ban magazines. That is not happening anymore. They have lost thread, or they realize there's not really return on this. So yeah, some of these things are critically different, and I think to our benefit.
And also, they don't want to talk about it because they always have to position themselves as the ones who are solving the problem. They can't be like, okay, we got a major issue here, and we can't really do anything about it because it doesn't really comport to the law. And we certainly aren't technologically advanced to figure out how to like hack all these 3D printers to make it so you can't print guns. So we're just going to sweep it under the rug and just point at school shootings as a pretext to seize AR-15s.
Yes, although, to your point here, there's a lot of accusations about suspicious shootings recently, right? If there was to be, I think, a big school shooting or a notable shooting that used a 3D printed gun, everything we're saying here could probably be very quickly reversed. You see what I'm saying?
Can you let's just quickly? Can you talk about, as far as you know, if you're, I don't know if you've been following this. My understanding is that Governor DeSantis, Trump's biggest rival in the Republican primary, has significantly liberalized gun rights or somewhat liberalized gun rights in Florida. Florida, which has large metropolitan areas, which have big Democratic voting blocks, which are traditionally very antithetical to any kind of gun rights. Has he had a good record, in your opinion, on the gun issue?
I can't speak to his record, man. All I've seen in Florida is post Parkland. There were a number of bad gun laws passed, and there was a big anti-gun interest, implanted there. And so DeSantis may have provided significant pushback there, but as I understand it, the state of Florida laws it's not especially notable in terms of like radical, gun
Okay.
liberty. That's my own opinion about it.
My understanding is that the Parkland laws either were recently repealed or expired, because I know the dad, his name's Fred something.
Oh,
Uh,
like Gutenberg or something.
yeah, yeah, he's still holding his daughter's bloody shirt up and being like, "Oh, how dare you!"
It's
And it's
enough.
really kind of fun to troll him because he's so disingenuous and acting in bad faith. And there's only two people who hold up, their kids as human shields, and that's them and Hamas. So I have about as much respect for those two groups
It,
equally.
it
Um,
is it is tough, man, to watch. He'll point to a photo of his dead daughter on a stairway and like make you look at it. You've seen that stuff, right?
yeah,
It's so weird. It's so weird.
Yeah, but it's also the fact that you can only go back so many times to that well, and the fact that now people are like just yawning, and to their, do have a point that like they talk to these conservatives, or more specifically gun rights advocates, and the gun rights advocates just don't care, and they're like, you people are heartless and evil, and they're not entirely wrong that there is something a little effed up that people are drawn to be like, yeah, my daughter was killed in a school shooting, like I don't fucking care. Give me my AR-15. But at the same time, it's like you're not engaging in good faith. This would not have saved your daughter. No one you're talking to thinks it's a good thing that your daughter is gone. If we had a magic wand, every single person listening to this or at prayer would have had her come back, or never had any harm come to her, have her have a long, happy, healthy life. So at a certain point, it's like, what else do you want us to do? Like, this isn't going to accomplish your goal. And at the end of the day, I suspect you understand this.
At this point, he surely does. But I have just a personal animus against old Fred because he used to get on CNN and tell everybody to shut down my company and everything. So
Oh, I didn't know that.
I can't probably see clearly about it, but I've probably distracted you from the point you were trying to make when you mentioned him. So
No, but just that was the point that I was trying to make, that like on the one hand, 10, 15 years ago, this would have been like people would be kind of in eggshells around him, because this is something horrible that I wouldn't wish on almost anybody. But the fact that the discourse has become, like, yeah, too bad, I'm going to troll you, you clown. Like, it's bad in the sense that, hold on a second, maybe we were losing a little bit of our humanity. At the same time, it's like, this is a demon we're speaking with, so you don't really have to engage with him as a fellow human being who is interested in rational discourse towards achieving a public safety.
yeah, we've all been like Twitterized. I mean, there's like Jungian perversity on both sides here, and of course we can easily see the perversity of our enemy. But yeah, we should recognize our own. I think. I
Uh,
take.
I'm really, the thing that I really love about your organization, the work you're doing, is that you're not sitting on your laurels, and you see what they are trying to do 1, 2, 5, 10 years down the pike. And it's like, and this is the other thing I'm just excited about the internet in general, that like with Bitcoin and just decentralized internet more broadly speaking, where people are like, all right, we know what the threats are. We're going to look at these not as like we should sit down and have discourse, but like these are effectively like viruses. How do we navigate and create workarounds to make sure that once they put into place what it is that they're threatening, that it's going to be impotent just from day one? And also, when you have an organization or a person and they're putting a lot of resources into something that they promised is going to be a victory for them, and they have literally nothing to show for it, and thanks to social media, they could have that rubbed in their faces, that is really good for morale, and in terms of proof of concept on a separate issue.
Well, first I'll say thanks. Second, like I feel lucky to be able to play this little game of chess we played for 10 years. I know
Yeah,
most people don't get this kind of run, so I feel very lucky. But that is how we see it. It's like, well, maybe you can't get much done in a year, but in 10 years you can do a lot. And I won't take credit for the entire work of like what's now a vast community of
of
people, but
course.
there's so many levels of development and like also disinterest and just the hobby level activity that, but it still sustains a culture and the way of just dismantling these laws in the first place. Okay, I'm heavily regulated, let's say, in certain respects, but I'll give you a component, and this other company isn't regulated at all. That completes the circuit. And so, yeah, there's a sufficient, let's say, network of people now who are dedicated to this, to where this is not a way through. There's no way out here for gun control people, and increasingly they recognize it. And I hear these breathless accusations like, well, if you're making a gun, you're a white supremacist. And it's like, okay, I know we're winning.
Right, right. Yeah, I will give guns for free to as many black people as you like. Just point them out. Native Americans, Asians, whoever you want. More, yeah.
That's how
I will
that's how
say to
you.
you, I will say to you what I said to Glenn Beck on his show, and I'm curious if you agree, although I'm sure you do. I said to him, I go, "You're Americans. Revolution is your heritage," and I think the need for Americans to feel safe and secure in their homes is maybe not uniquely American. I think the Swiss have that as part of their heritage, but certainly quintessentially American. And one of the reasons why I'm so proud and happy to be residing in Texas and have such contempt and disdain for the city that I was forced to flee. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I used to say, this was before the age of cancellation. I used to say like insurrection is as American as apple pie.
But
I
apple
said,
pie's German. That's the thing. So are you
well, you
being?
know what? Take it up with Curtis. But
Are you doing an Andy Kaufman bit?
I said I would say insurrection is as American as apple pie. And some anti-gun group, I think the Coalition to Stop Gun Violence, who is probably no longer with us, but they put me on this list of American insurrectionists because I simply observed that, sorry, Thomas Jefferson and like literal American presidents were like fanatical left-wing revolutionaries who literally believed in murdering the government every 20 years. It's in your political culture. So I agree with you. And of course, I more than agree with you. I over-identify with that. I think there's nothing more American than kind of ridiculously unhistorical, ahistorical attempts at overthrowing your government.
And I also want to point out that there's that great quote: "If this be treason, make the most of it." What
Mhm.
that was in reference to was, I'm blanking on the guy's name. Who was that?
I can Google
Um,
it right now if you want.
yeah,
What are you talking
I
about?
can't
Patrick
believe I'm
Henry or
blanking.
somebody?
Patrick Henry, duh, of course.
Yeah,
It's Patrick Henry. He's in the Virginia House of Burgesses, whatever it was.
yeah,
And he's talking about King George. And he goes, I'd remind King George that there were a few other kings who kind of overstepped their bounds and they wound up hanging from a lamppost or whatever. And everyone's like, oh, and he goes,
yeah,
hey, they're treason, treason, treason. And he goes, if this be treason, make the most of it. And he basically
yeah.
was just grabbing his nuts and being like, yeah, if I'm an insurrectionist, come and get me. And they tried to
Yo,
come and they didn't get him.
yo, he was wild. And actually, yeah, he's the first guy. They were doing some of these things like, oh, the king's taking away our charter for our militia. What do we do? And he's like, let's arm. And they're like, hey, man, slow down.
Yeah.
Hey, buddy, we're not talking about. He predicted literal outbreak of war. With arms about a year before anybody wanted to in Virginia. And
Whoa,
of
whoa,
course,
whoa,
obviously,
whoa.
he's not the first.
Let's just reason with King George.
Well, Dickinson and these guys were like, they got just up there. They're like, well, we're this close, but you know what? The bright thing to do is to be good English subjects and good Englishmen. And Henry, yeah, he's a G dude. I got his biography by Kukla over here, and he's in these settings, and he's saying like, I summon the artillery of heaven. And people are like, holy hell. People who observed that liberty or death speech, they were like, literally, bury me here. I have never heard a speech like this before. He was ready to rock and roll, dude. That's America for you.
I have my eye on an auction on July 6th signed by a letter signed by John Brown to his wife, who was the terrorist, abolitionist terrorist. I really have to add Patrick Henry to my list and have him framed above my desk because that guy is a real hero and far more than me in my bougie, nice.
I, just because we're talking about him, George Mason's right up there. He obviously wasn't
Yep.
as spirited, but George Mason wrote all the proto Second Amendment language. Virginia was the first to include it in its Virginia Declaration of Rights, and all the radicals in France were like giving them awards. George Mason, Patrick Henry, you guys are crazy. You guys are wild. You out there. We lose the sense of how like these early colonial democracies were like the most radical experiments in utopian democracy in the world at the time. I think South Carolina was the first truly universal white suffrage place outside of Vermont. I mean, we just don't understand how crazy these guys were in a distinct political or like historical senses. And
Yeah,
militia culture was right there.
and it's also kind of crazy because they were all extremely high status. So
Yeah,
they had a lot to lose. So we don't really have that where you have like extremely, other than maybe Elon to some extent with buying Twitter, but he's not
right.
risking his life. Like that they were really like big shots at the top of the heap and they were, you know, slamming their dicks at the table being like, what?
Yeah.
Like it's really something that there's no analogy to in contemporary times at all.
That's a great point. I was also reading about like the trans Kentucky, Virginia militia stuff and Indian War, and it turns out like a lot of the congressmen at that time on the weekend they would just go lead their local militia and go fight
Yeah,
Indians. It's like, yeah, let's just go to war in the woods. I mean, these are some wild dudes, man.
yeah. Cody, we're running out of time. What has been your favorite part of this interview?
I liked when we talked about atrazine in the water. We probably did somebody some good there.
You are welcome.